City of Bones. More like City of Boars. Am I right? This is City of Bones. Hey everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, bringing you another book to determine, is it worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? That's what we're here to decide. Let's get into it. City of Bones is the first book in the Mortal Instruments trilogy written by Cassandra Clare and published on March 27, 2007. This book is the debut novel for Cassandra Clare, and it was met with positive praise pretty much all around, at least so far as I could tell. I remember when it came out, but I don't think I actually picked up the series until City of Ashes had been out for a couple weeks. But as I could find, it was nominated for a couple awards, such as the Abraham Lincoln Illinois High School Book Award in 2010, and the Pacific Northwest Library Association Young Readers Award of the same year. Outside of the awards, like I said, the reception of the book was actually fairly high. It was very popular when it first came out, as I can personally attest, because I picked it up and read it myself and enjoyed it. To emphasize, here's the ratings. However, we're not done with those ratings. To give you some fair warning, this is one of those books that's actually somewhat more interesting on its background and creation than it is the book itself. So, let's get into this. Cassandra Clare may have published this as her debut novel, but this actually isn't her first foray into writing. Cassandra Clare actually wrote under the pen name Cassandra Clare. It's different, see, because there's an I instead of an R-E. So, yeah. But under this name, she published a series of fanfics, most commonly within the Harry Potter or the Lord of the Rings fandom. Actually, the two most famous ones that she's known for is the Lord of the Rings fanfiction, The Very Secret Diaries, and perhaps more importantly, the Harry Potter fanfic called the Draco Trilogy. Well, it's kind of three fanfics. Each fanfic is called its own thing. But the fanfic overall is called the Draco Trilogy. Obviously, the Draco Trilogy was set in the world of Harry Potter. However, it focused instead on Draco, which, from what I can remember, the first book was about Draco and Harry Potter accidentally switching bodies due to a strange polymorph potion accident. It's been a long while, and unfortunately, with the publication of the Mortal Instruments, she deleted all fanfics. And I didn't really dive too deep into the internet to try to find the stuff that would have been re-uploaded on another site. But the fun fact is, the Draco Trilogy is actually the trope namer for the Draco in leather pants trope. Now, for those of you who aren't too familiar with tropes, this is when a character, most commonly in a fanfiction setting, or through the perception of the fans of the series, receive a treatment where they often downplay the character's negative qualities or even turn them outright into a victim, trying to imply that the heroes were the bad guys all along, if not at least completely misunderstood about this character. It's basically the exact opposite trait of the Ron the Death Eater trope, ironically. Both started from Harry Potter fanfics, where the idea of an otherwise good and decent character is suddenly twisted into an evil, vile being because of one small act of character flaw. It's actually more common than you think, surprisingly. Now, this may not seem relevant at first. After all of us have engaged in some manner of fanfiction as when we were younger, at least. I mean, even if you didn't put a pen to paper, a lot of us probably envisioned our own characters in the world of something, or pretended we were part of that world. In a sense, that is fanfiction. I myself have even written several that are still kind of up to this day. I'm not going to tell you which ones, don't ask. Trust me, it's one of those, at the time I loved them, but I realize now how much work I needed as a writer. I probably still need work now, but, if I'm saying that now and I still need work now, yeah. My point is, there's no shame in writing fanfiction. This isn't here so I can shame Clare for a fanfiction beginning. However, this is important because the Draco trilogy is basically what set the stage for Mortal Instruments to be written. Now, it's not necessarily proven, but there's a lot of belief that the Mortal Instruments is basically just the Draco trilogy, but rewritten so the author can publish it as her own work. Because, turning fan fictions into your own work and publishing it is never a bad idea. But you see, what's really interesting about this trilogy is why I could never finish the Draco trilogy. Like I said, I wrote a lot of fanfics, and with that came reading a lot of fanfics as a teenager. And I remember the Draco trilogy being one of those fanfics that I read. Now, mind you, this was almost 20 years ago now, give or take 2 or 3 years. So, I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys that I don't remember very much about it, but I do remember some things. And I do remember one of the reasons I couldn't finish it. And that was because Cassandra Clare got caught plagiarizing quite a bit. Chapter 9 of the second story within the Draco trilogy was identified by one fan as having plagiarized extensive sequences of action, description, and dialogues from an out-of-print fantasy novel known as The Hidden Land by Pamela Dean. While this alone was enough to get Clare banned from fanfiction.net, that's where my primary source of reading was, if you want to go searching, feel free, that's where the fanfics are. It was also discovered by a lot of her readers that she liked to borrow other things from other works, such as complex webs of dialogue that characters speak. Basically, the characters would have almost the exact same conversations as something from, like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, to be specific. She also was known to... She often reproduced concepts, rough scenes, descriptive phrases, and dialogue from several fantasy novels as well. These borrowings were often uncited, or cited in such a way that the amount of which she borrowed from those works was very much downplayed within the citation itself. Why do I bring this up, you ask? I mean, again, this is fan fiction. She could have evolved past this. Well, I bring this up because in 2016, author Sherilyn Kenyon actually filed a lawsuit against Cassandra Clare, alleging that the author had stolen much of her story and the concepts from Kenyon's own work, known as the Dark Hunter books, such as how both series employ a line of warriors who protect the normal world from demons. In both series, a young person becomes a part of the Dark Hunters, or Shadow Hunters, world after being saved by a gorgeous blonde Dark Hunter, or Shadow Hunter. They each must kill the demonic father. Both Dark Hunters and Shadow Hunters have enchanted swords that are divinely forged, imbued with otherworldly spirits, have unique names, and glow like heavenly fire. While based on some of Clare's own other controversies, such as within her fanfictions, there's quite a bit of reason to believe that this may actually be the case. However, speaking, the historical romance novelist and former professor of law, Courtney Milan, would point out 95% of what she, i.e. Sherilyn Kenyon, is claiming are just character tropes and journeys and items from our shared literary background. Literally, both stories draw from our collective mythological history. That's why there are similarities. Fundamental to the idea of copyright protection is that you can't copyright ideas, only the expression of them. If you could copyright ideas, nobody would be able to write anything, ever. And yes, we've certainly seen quite a bit of that, how certain people will attempt to copyright just the very idea of something, only be met with massive backlash. One such was, I remember a big popular YouTuber, I'm struggling for their name, copyright the very idea of reaction videos, even though they weren't the ones that started them. But Milan also makes a pretty decent point here. See, when Kenyon initially accuses Clare of copyright, she claims that her and Clare had talked and come to a sort of an agreement that Clare would have to change a bunch of things so that they wouldn't fall underneath the copyright. Kenyon claims that she had a contract, but never brought it forth to substantiate her claims. And Milan pointed out that if such a contract existed, Kenyon would have no reason to hide it. In the end, I'm not really here to tell you which side of the story to believe. Personally, from the sounds of it, it does sort of sound like Kenyon is stretching a bit. However, I've never personally read Kenyon's book, The Dark Hunters. And as such, I'm willing to more believe Cassandra Clare just happened to write a lot of similar elements to her story by accident rather than purposely plagiarizing her work. I like to believe in the best of people, to be completely honest, and honestly, Milan makes a good point. It might just be similar because they're pulling from the same source of inspiration. But with that out of the way, let's get on to what we're here to talk about properly. The book. Now let's start where we always start. The cover. The cover on this is basically exactly what you'd expect for this kind of story, to be completely honest with you. You got a bland city background while tendrils of greenish smoke swirl, all while a handsome, hunky blonde stands in the background. You can't see his face, but you can see his chest, and you know that's what everyone's here for. Honestly, if I had one complaint, this feels more like a Harlequin romance novel more than anything. And for those of you who don't know what a Harlequin romance novel is, you know those really cheap, quick books that you see in every store that has a woman clinging to the bare chest of a handsome, hunky man? That's basically a Harlequin novel. And most of the time they're just cheap schlock spit out for people to enjoy in a kind of fantasy way. Typically aimed towards women, but, I'm sure guys can read it too. Even admittedly, the back is kind of bland. It's just kind of the cityscape continued, along with those swirls creating an almost reflective background, with a synopsis on the back. And because of that, it's just one of those meh books. There's nothing really to complain about on this cover. It does its job fine, and yeah, it knows exactly who it's aiming for with this cover. I just personally don't think it really says enough about the book itself. Like I said, this looks more like a Harlequin romance than a young adult urban fantasy novel. Now, let's just move on to what we can call the synopsis. Now, the synopsis. I already read the back of the book in my TBR. If you want to see me read it, go ahead and check it out there. However, to give a more in-depth synopsis here, this book includes the character Clary Frey. You know what? I don't even have the time to deal with this. Yeah, obviously. But let's just move on. Basically, Clary Frey is a young girl, I think about 15 or 16, who gets caught up in the supernatural world after she goes to a club named Pandemonium and discovers a group of shadow hunters currently hunting I think a demon. That's kind of what they said it was, but from the description, it almost sounds like a rogue vampire. I'll get into that more later. And eventually, however, she has to turn to these group of demon hunters for help after her mother is kidnapped by the big bad evil guy, Valentine. This happens because her mother was the former wife of Valentine. It turns out that he's looking for a magical object known as the Mortal Cup. Now, the Mortal Cup is a object where you can take it and you turn regular humans into shadow hunters, as he wants to create a massive army of shadow hunters that they don't currently have due to their tiny numbers, and proceed to wipe out all the demons that are currently infesting this world. However, what makes this plan so horrible is the fact that you have to be a very specific kind of person to survive the transformation from human to shadow hunter. And it's estimated that about 1 out of every 20 kids he would give this to would die before becoming shadow hunters. So yeah, it's an awful plan, and Valentine clearly does not care about the collateral damage that's going to be caused by this. So Clary must try to find the Mortal Cup and her mother to prevent Valentine from wiping out all of what she deems muddled blood. And all the while, trying to decide, the hunky bad boy with blonde hair, or the best friend that's been with her her entire life. Who knows? What do I like about this book? Honestly, Claire knows exactly what kind of audience she's aiming for. Yeah, I mean, As much as I'm kind of bragging on this book a little bit, it's kind of clear that Claire knows exactly the kind of people who are gonna pick up and enjoy her book. She knows what teenagers feel like, and if I'm being completely honest, this book was actually rather nostalgic for me. Even though I had read it when I was a teenager, this book takes you very much back to your teenager days when you were reading stuff like this and thinking, this is the height of literary fiction. This is what should be on the shelves of the Library of Congress. And you know what? To a certain degree, it took me back to those moments, and I did have fun reading it because of that. So it's hard to fault the book for that. I mean, some people may find the characters annoying because of that, but to me, they're just teenagers. And yeah, teenagers can be annoying nowadays, don't get me wrong. But it's not really worth getting mad about if you go on with that perspective. The book is even well written in a certain objective sense, in the sense that I can read through it just fine without stopping and stuttering constantly. Which, trust me, that makes a book really frustrating really fast. You don't even know yet. Anyways, another thing I enjoyed about this book is that the world was actually semi-interesting to learn about. There's a bit of mythology here that Claire crafts for herself within the book that is sort of unique to her. Like I said, it goes more into urban fantasy, which is already a genre I feel there's nowhere near enough books in, and I love so much. But that being said, it's always a tough balance. One of the things that I really liked about this book was the explanation about how vampires and werewolves exist. You see, in this world, really demons are the main big bad supernatural threat. They're basically interdimensional invaders that come to this world, want to suck out all the life, and then move on to the next world. Now, the reason that vampires and werewolves exist is because when demons basically surge into to a new world, they bring with them a collection of diseases or, artifacts and stuff like that get brought into this new world. Vampires and werewolves aren't so much supernatural creatures that exist simply because they exist, but rather because the demons brought over diseases which create them. There's also warlocks, which are half demon, half human, half-breeds who are capable of magic. They seem human, but, they can wield magic now, unlike normal humans, who, try as they might, will never be able to wield magic. Because everything is so connected to the incursion of demons, the world feels nice and connected, flowing smoothly between the pieces, as you can see just how much of an effect these demons have had. Even the shadow hunters are directly connected to demons. They aren't just something that existed. So honestly, I like that a lot. It's a good world-building connection that I think fits pretty well. I also rather like a few of the characters. Claire shows she really can write good characters. My personal favorite is Magnus Bane, the warlock who has to help remove a memory block from Clary's head. Every time he's in the pages, he just kind of stills the scene, and of all the characters that are presented, he's definitely the best. Don't get me wrong, he's just the best. I also personally like Luke Garraway, who is sort of like a surrogate father/uncle for Clary that we're introduced to. He's a very complicated character that I enjoyed learning about as I read through the story. I can't speak too much on him without spoiling, although I admittedly probably have spoiled quite a bit already. But for the moment, I'm going to leave it at that. Admittedly, though, there is one part of Luke's interaction that confuses the heck out of me still, because Clary mentions how she wanted to call Luke Uncle Luke, but Luke was never comfortable with that because it makes him think of Uncle Tom, like from Uncle Tom's Cabin. And I'm trying to figure out, is that a really clunky way of telling us Luke was black, or just because I don't see the connection there otherwise. So I'm just gonna go with that. I wanted to bring that up because I'm getting into the parts I don't like. Now, let's get into what I don't like about this book. The love triangle. When it comes to love triangles, they're considered generally a bane to most readers' existence. A love triangle is almost never done properly, and they often pop up in really bad YA novels. Personally speaking, I like love triangles when they're written well. And unfortunately, love triangles are very rarely written well, especially in YA novels. My least favorite of the love triangle is the one that is blatantly there just to cause tension. I.e., there's no debate if the main female the main component of the love triangle should end up with point A or point B. Because we all know it's going to be point A. Point B only exists so the author can squeeze some nice drama out of it. And this is one of those triangles. Just reading this, you know for a fact that she's going to end up with Jace. No matter how often she talks about Simon, her best friend, she talks about how she gets jealous when Simon shows interest in other girls, or how Simon is really handsome when she thinks about it. You know, no matter how many times she says that, the book is going to give her to Jace. That sounds wrong. She's going to go to Jace in the end. The worst one is, it's just one of those, it's no point in the love triangle if you're not even going to try to make it a debate with the reader. And I mean an actual debate. Make it so either one she could look up with is actually someone interesting and she would be good with, rather than just, eh. But to be perfectly honest, this also brings up another complaint I have. Which, when it comes to this type of love triangle, I just want to know why. Why that choice is made. Now, obviously, I'm not a woman, and I've never really been in a situation like this, so my own experience with why this is so interesting is very limited. With these love triangles, I notice it's always between this guy, who is kind, understanding, knows you really well, and has been your friend for years. He doesn't want to impose on you, but it's clear he really wants to be in a relationship with you. That's option A. And then option B is the cynical, cold, jackass character who talks down to you most of the time, and then, you're pretty sure he hates you for most of the book, but then all of a sudden you find out that he has a soft, delicate inside, and don't worry, you can totally change him, plus he's super fucking hot. So, I personally don't understand that. I mean, yeah, there's a good way. To me, it's just always go with the person that's more emotionally fitting. Because oftentimes, option B is always just gonna one of those, it gives off the wrong impression. It's always he's a guy who puts me in a relationship that's borderline abusive, if not abusive, but at least he's really hot, and I can change him. And it's just, I don't get that. I know teenagers tend to fantasize about that a little bit more, but for me, I just personally never saw it, even as a teenager, so I just don't understand this. I never understood this. And I'm gonna end this with this quick aside. Men, just because you are friends with a woman, and just because you have an interest in her, she does not owe you a relationship. If she says no, accept it and move on. The likelihood is she's never going to change her mind. Alright? Another thing I began to notice is this story is a little inconsistent, both with its plot and its characters. To preface the character one, let's start with this. You see, the beginning of the book starts with Clary and Simon going to a club known as Pandemonium. Now, obviously, this is where she sees the Shadow Hunters killing the demon. In this specific case, we're told at the very beginning that the only reason they come here is that Clary really likes coming to the club, whereas Simon just doesn't like coming, but only comes because Clary asked him to, and she doesn't want to go alone. We've already established a quick dynamic. Simon's the more calm, collected, he's fine spending the day inside reading kind of person, whereas Clary's the one who wants to go out and have adventures. Somewhere through the book, it flips almost, where Simon's the one who kind of wants to go out, have adventures, is the one who's gung-ho and willing to go out and do stuff, whereas Clary is more of the artsy kind of girl who would be happy just staying inside all day, drawing her paintings and stuff. And it's just one of those, it feels weird. Maybe it was just me, but that honestly, they just do a 180 on the characters. If you're going to make someone like Clary someone who wants to go to a club all the time, especially a club called Pandemonium, try to stick with that characterization. But another thing is, and this one is arguably more subjective, with Jace, the blonde love interest, one of the things that everyone describes him as witty, charming, and funny, but really, most of his stuff is just him being a jerk. He really, again, depending on who you are, he just comes off as a very aggressive jerk most of the time. Yeah, he says something occasionally that makes you chuckle, and he has an interesting dynamic with Simon when the two aren't, clashing with each other. But otherwise, most of what he says just comes off as mean or self-absorbed. So, also, I'm not gonna lie, this book does not handle its foreshadowing well at all. See, when it comes to foreshadowing, there's a delicate balance you have to walk between giving the reader just enough information that they can look back and say, oh, that's what that meant. But not enough that they figure it out immediately and just sort of be like, oh yeah, obviously, what else could it have been? A perfect example of this one is the Rose Quartz is Pink Diamond twist of Steven Universe. It's been spoiled. I'm sorry if I spoiled anyone, but it's pretty much what's going to happen. See, throughout the entirety of Steven Universe, there's huge, heavy hints that Rose Quartz, the main deified character that was Steven's mother, was actually Pink Diamond the entire time. In fact, it was so constantly hinted at and heavily implied that a lot of people began to think there's no way it can be Pink Diamond because that's too obvious. And when it was finally revealed that it was Pink Diamond, not only was no one surprised, but it actually kind of destroyed characters. It destroyed both Pearl's and Rose Quartz's character in the process. But I'll talk about that later. But specifically, I'm going to talk about the other side now, where you don't give enough hints and it feels like it comes out of nowhere. But yeah, when you give away too little, your plot point becomes more like Game of Thrones Season 6. Something that was sort of hinted at, but not enough that when the twist finally came, because yes, I know what the twist is, because the internet was literally set on fire by it. There was almost no avoiding it. But for those of you who know Game of Thrones Season 6, that obviously the show, because Martin won't finish the books. But the Game of Thrones Season 6 is, everyone knows how bad that was. And that's what you run the risk of when you don't give enough information, or you don't hint at what's going to happen enough. It comes out of nowhere and ruins the stuff that came before as well. Cassandra Clare is way too much in this camp. In fact, I don't even feel bad about spoiling some stuff in this book, because anyone who picks up this book and reads 100 pages is going to see most of the twists coming. Because Claire just kind of hits you over the head with it, and then tries to say, wow, isn't that shocking? Later on. And the final complaint about this book, really, is just that it's boring. Yeah, I mean, I tried to avoid saying it, but really, that's just the best way I can say about this book. This book feels like it's overwritten in places. That Claire felt the need to fill out 500 pages worth of material, even if she didn't necessarily have it right now. There were several points where that means there's a lot of padding. There's so many things going on at once in this book, and because of that, the story doesn't feel like it has time to focus on any one of them. It tries hopping between them, but not to very much effect. Very much a quantity over quality kind of approach to me. Honestly, at times I found myself just skimming the book, waiting for a scene to be over before realizing, no, I need to go back and properly read that section so I can understand and talk to you guys about it. Honestly, if I wasn't doing this channel, I probably would have stopped reading this book at page 105 or something. A lot of what goes on feels like padding or overwritten sections just because the author needed to fill this out. And honestly, you might argue that's because I've already read this before. I knew where the story was going, so I'm obviously not going to be as invested as when the story itself gets there on its own time, because I already know where it's going. Yeah, you're not wrong, but I don't necessarily mean it because of that. You remember those plagiarism arguments I mentioned before? Well, this is kind of why I brought them up mainly. Now, I'm not accusing Cassandra Clare of plagiarism, don't get me wrong, but it's very clear the inspiration she had when she was writing this. I made the joke earlier at the beginning, but the bad guy is basically just Voldemort with a semi-different motivation due to the world being different. You have dialogue that feels like it was taken from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It even rips off Star Wars. Think of the big twist in Star Wars, and yeah, they're in this book too. I mean, I kind of already said it, but it's in this book too. So yeah, it just, as I've said multiple times before, a book being similar to another piece of work doesn't automatically make it bad. However, it became blatantly clear the longer I read what she was taking from, and because of that, it started to get boring because I already knew where she was going because she was taking from that other work. It's sort of like Aragon, what I mentioned. Aragon itself is its own unique story, but it borrows so heavily from Star Wars: A New Hope that you can't just help but feel like, I've read this before. I've already seen this story. And that's sort of the problem that lends to this book. And yeah, that's what makes it boring to me. Also, if I'm being completely honest, Jace is just Draco from the Draco trilogy as far as I remember. Like, I'm pretty sure if I can find a copy of the Draco trilogy, I'll be able to pull direct lines from Draco and apply them to Jace, and you won't even notice a difference. For all my complaints about this book and all my compliments about the book, we have to get eventually now to here. My personal rating. And what would I consider the City of Bones be worth rated? 5 out of 10. I mean, yeah, certainly not as bad as I was expecting or what I've heard throughout. Personally, even from my own personal experience, my issue was never with City of Bones. I loved City of Bones as a kid. What I disliked about the Mortal Instruments series probably comes in City of Ashes, where I'm just, for those of you who know the twist, you know exactly why I'm making that. I cannot stand that. The story has a lot of good and a lot of bad with it, but unfortunately neither really cancels out the other in enough of a way to make the story interesting, either because it was that bad or because it was that good. So that's why I personally say it's a 5. It just sits right there in the middle. I mean, if you're looking for a YA novel about urban fantasy, I mean, pick it up, I guess. But personally, I mean, you can probably find things that are much worse and much better. Because of that, it doesn't necessarily... I don't believe it deserves Mount Doom. With that being said, that's pretty much all there is to say about this book. We're 3 books in now, and we're on the last one. And trust me, this next one is going to make you take flight into the night. I'll see you all next time, and remember, with every book comes an adventure. And every adventure is worth having. I hope so.